Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a chilling story from World War II, the forgotten world of Arctic aviation. The frozen wastes of the Arctic weren't just a battle of geography, but a brutal test of endurance for the pilots who dared to fly there. You're about to step into the boots of those brave men who fought against the ice, the storm, and the overwhelming cold, all while trying to stay alive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. It's the kind of place where survival itself becomes an act of defiance. And trust me, this isn't the kind of adventure you'll just walk away from. You probably won't survive this. But that's exactly why this story is so gripping. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fun to know where our sleepy history fans are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine it's the middle of winter, the Arctic wind biting at your skin. The sun barely rises, as if it rises at all. Instead, there's a long stretch of darkness, with the faintest sliver of daylight showing up here and there, as though the world itself is holding its breath. The first time you step foot in this desolate land, the cold instantly takes you by surprise. It's not the cold you get in your fridge, or even that chill you feel in the mountains. No, this is a kind of cold that feels like it's digging into your bones. It creeps under your skin and freezes you from the inside out. This is where we find our pilots. They're not just flying through the air. They're navigating a world that seems intent on killing them. Every flight feels like it could be their last. But in typical World War II fashion, duty calls, and they rise to the challenge. You find yourself gearing up for your first flight here. The cockpit is cramped and uncomfortable, a far cry from the well-insulated, polished interiors of other military planes you've flown. The instruments are simple, almost archaic in comparison to what you're used to. But in the Arctic, simplicity becomes a blessing. There's no room for complicated technology that could freeze up in the cold. Instead, everything in your cockpit is built for function, for survival. The only thing that matters now is keeping that engine running. It's about staying alive in a place that wants nothing more than to swallow you whole. The moment you step outside, the chill immediately slaps you in the face. Your breath comes out in visible clouds, and your body reacts instantly, shivering from the sudden shock of the cold air. The ground is a slick sheet of ice, and you can already feel the tension in your muscles. It's not just the cold that's threatening your survival, is everything. From the unpredictable weather that can shift at a moment's notice, to the barren landscape where everything blends into a white blur. There's no cover, no shelter, no place to hide from the unforgiving elements. And then there's the isolation. No phone calls home, no radio chatter from the outside world. Just the deafening silence of a place that's too cold for anyone to want to live in. The cold gnaws at everyone's spirit, but you can't let that show. You're part of a team, and you need each other to survive. As you climb into the cockpit, the heavy layers of clothing you wear are almost too much to bear. It feels like you're wearing everything in your wardrobe at once, but the truth is, it's barely enough. The layers are designed to trap warmth, but in the end, they do little to stop the chill from creeping in. The plane's engines sputter too, life coughing and grumbling as they warm up. The sound of the cold metal grinding together like it's reluctant to work in this frigid air. The plane is an old warbird, and it shows. You've been trained on more modern aircraft, but here, in the Arctic, these older models are still the backbone of the mission. They're simple, easy to repair, and at least in theory, tough enough to withstand the cold. But you've seen what happens when things go wrong. The cold does strange things to metal, and nothing in the Arctic stays working forever. You've seen engines freeze, mid-flight propellers get stuck, and hydraulic systems fail at the worst possible moment. You try to keep your mind off the risks, focusing instead on the task at hand, the mission. It's the reason you're here. It's what keeps you going, even when everything else around you feels like it's falling apart. The target is a base miles away, deep in the snow, hidden beneath layers of white. You've been briefed on your route, but that doesn't make it any easier. You check the instruments. Everything looks good. The wind is picking up though. You're not sure if you'll make it through the storm, but you can't let that stop you. You have a job to do, and the Arctic isn't going to make it any easier. The takeoff is bumpy. It's eerily quiet once you're airborne. The hum of the engine is the only sound, muffled by the thick layers of insulation. The landscape beneath you is endless, a blank canvas of snow that stretches on forever, broken only by the occasional ridge of ice or the hint of a mountain in the distance. You start to wonder if this is what the pilots before you felt: the isolation, the silence, the weight of it all. As you climb higher into the Arctic sky, the chill intensifies. Your body feels like it's freezing from the inside, and the cold creeps into your very soul. You glance at the instrument panel, trying to keep everything in check. The engine's doing okay for now, but there's a constant nagging fear in the back of your mind. What if it stops? What if the cold has gotten to it, too? It's not long before the storm hits. You see the clouds rolling in thick, dark, and menacing. The visibility drops to near zero, and you're left flying blind, trusting the instruments and the feeling in your gut. The Arctic weather is notorious for changing without warning, and you've learned the hard way that one misstep could mean disaster. The storm is brutal, pushing the plane off course, the turbulence throwing you around like a toy. You grip the controls tighter, hoping you're heading in the right direction. And then, just when you think things can't get worse, the engine sputters. A loud bang echoes through the cockpit. Panic surges, but there's no time for that now. You need to land, and fast. The engine grinds to a halt, and the plane lurches, but somehow you manage to get control. Your mind races through emergency procedures. There's no room for error here. One wrong move, and you're lost in the frozen wilderness. But somehow, you make it. The plane touches down with a bone-jarring thud, and you feel the immediate rush of relief until you remember you've still got to survive the rest of this mission. You're here now, but the real challenge is just beginning. The air is frigid, so cold it stings your skin with every breath. You step into the cockpit, and the wind howls outside, swirling the snow in a fierce dance. The day starts before dawn, with the sun barely brushing the horizon in a muted, endless twilight. Your flight suit feels heavy, but it's the only thing standing between you and the frozen death outside. You've been through this routine 1,000 times, yet it never gets easier. Every time you climb into the cockpit, a part of you knows there's a chance you won't come back. But you push that thought aside. There's a job to do, that the engines roar to life, sending vibrations through the frame of the plane as you wait for the warmth to trickle through the fuselage. It's a slow process. In these temperatures, even the most advanced engines need time to come alive. But you've learned to wait patiently. The cold bites at your fingers, and the frost that coats the edges of the windshield makes it harder to see, but you've gotten used to it. In the Arctic, everything is an obstacle, and you've been trained to overcome them all. The thinness of the air at such extreme altitudes makes every maneuver more difficult, and the plane feels sluggish, unresponsive. You adjust the throttle, praying the engine doesn't falter. The weather, of course, is always a factor. Storms roll in without warning, and visibility can drop to zero in seconds. Your heart races when the fog rolls in, the world around you turning into a blur of white and gray. You grip the controls tightly, feeling the tension in your shoulders. The instruments flicker, and you rely heavily on your training. A slight miscalculation, a wrong turn, and you could end up on the ground in the middle of a blizzard, flying over the ice. Feels like the world is holding its breath. The land beneath you is white and desolate, an endless ocean of snow that seems to stretch on forever. There's nothing but the sound of your engine and the biting wind. The terrain is treacherous, with hidden crevasses and mountains that rise out of nowhere. The danger is constant, but you don't have time to dwell on it. You're on a mission, and the stakes are high. Every moment could be your last, but the goal is always the same: complete the mission and get back safely. You spot your destination, an isolated base on the horizon, barely visible through the snow and haze. As you descend, the cold begins to seep deeper into your bones. The tension in your chest grows with each passing second. But this is what you trained for. You navigate the storm with precision, fighting the instinct to give in to the panic that always seems to be lurking in the back of your mind. You're not just fighting against the elements, you're fighting your own fear. Landing is a whole other challenge. The runway is often little more than a strip of ice, with no markings to guide you in. The gear is stiff from the cold, and the wind is unforgiving, constantly shifting. The plane lurches as you touch down, sending a shiver through your body. But you make it. You've survived the flight. For now, once on the ground, the real struggle begins. The cold doesn't let up. You step out of the plane, and the biting wind immediately hits your face, sharp as a knife. There's no relief in sight. The ground crew rushes over to you, their faces just as weary as yours. They're bundled up in layers of clothing, their breath visible in the frigid air. As you climb out of the cockpit, your legs feel like jelly muscles, stiff from hours of tension. But you can't rest for long. You know what's coming next. It's time to refuel. The planes here are constantly in demand, and there's never enough time to catch your breath. The ground crew scrambles to get the plane ready for the next mission, and you can see the exhaustion in their eyes. They've been at it for hours, and yet they're still moving with purpose. They're the unsung heroes of this operation, keeping the planes flying, ensuring that the pilots can do their jobs, all while enduring the same harsh conditions. You glance over at one of the mechanics, his breath coming out in plumes of steam. His hands are raw from the cold, but he doesn't stop working. You share a nod, an unspoken understanding passing between you. The mission must go on during downtime. The isolation hits hardest. The base is small, a cluster of huts surrounded by miles of snow. It's a world cut off from everything, a place where time seems to stretch on endlessly. The nights feel especially long, with the sun barely setting. It's like the world is stuck in a permanent twilight. You can't help but feel the weight of the cold creeping into your bones. The quiet is deafening, and the constant hum of engines serves as a strange reminder that life continues here, despite the harshness. There's not much to do but wait for the next mission. You've learned to appreciate the small things, the warmth of the mess hall, the company of fellow pilots and ground crew, even the brief moments of rest before the next takeoff. But that's the reality of the Arctic War. There's no time for fear, no time for second guessing. You live for the mission, for the next flight, and for the hope that you'll make it back safely. The Arctic tests you in ways you never thought possible. It's not just about surviving the coldest, about surviving the isolation, the constant danger, and the overwhelming pressure to keep going, no matter the cost. Each mission is a reminder of how fragile life is here. One wrong move, one mechanical failure, and everything can come crashing down. But somehow, that's what keeps you going. The adrenaline, the rush of survival, the camaraderie of fellow pilots, it's a strange form of comfort in the midst of chaos. You've trained for this, prepared for this, but no amount of preparation can truly ready you for the Arctic's harsh embrace at the end of the day. When you're back in the barracks, your body aching from the cold, you realize something. You wouldn't have it any other way. This is your life now, and you're willing to face the dangers head-on, knowing that every time you survive, you're one step closer to victory. But survival is never guaranteed in the Arctic, and as you lay your head down on your cot, you know that tomorrow brings another battle. The ice is always waiting, and the mission is always calling. It's a cycle that never ends. But for now, you close your eyes and prepare yourself for the next flight, the next challenge, and the next cold, dangerous day in the Arctic skies. The relief from landing is short-lived. Stepping out of the cockpit, you're instantly reminded of the world you're in, an unforgiving wasteland of snow and ice, where the smallest misstep could be your last. The cold bites deeper than ever, and you can already feel your fingers stiffening. Every breath feels like inhaling glass, and the air is so thin it doesn't seem to fill your lungs properly. The wind howls like a living thing, chasing you across the tarmac as you scramble to secure the plane and get to shelter. The Arctic is an environment designed to break you down mentally and physically. Here, the risks don't just come from the enemy, but from the elements themselves. Flying through this frozen sky isn't like anything you've ever experienced before. The planes are always on the brink of failure, and the smallest mechanical issue can send you plummeting to the earth in seconds. It's a harsh reality, one you don't have the luxury of ignoring. The engine problems you faced earlier were a constant reminder of how delicate everything truly is. Planes weren't designed to fly in these conditions. The metal of the aircraft contracts and expands with the frigid temperatures, throwing the integrity of the plane into question with every takeoff. Fuel freezes, lubricants turn to sludge, and every part of the machine is put to the test by the brutal Arctic cold. Even the pilots face physical limitations. Cold-induced fatigue sets in faster than anywhere else, making every task harder, every decision more difficult. In this environment, even the most seasoned pilots feel the strain. You can hear it in the creaking of the aircraft as it's parked on the tarmac, the fuselage shuddering against the biting wind. The cockpit, once your sanctuary, now feels like a cage. The longer you stay on the ground, the colder it gets. The ground crews hustle, making last-minute repairs while trying to stay warm in their thick, insulated gear. But you know that their own survival depends on getting the planes back into the air. You glance over at the mechanic working on your plane, his hands moving with quick precision despite the frozen air. He's been doing this for hours, his breath visible in the cold. But there's no time to rest, no time to warm up. The missions don't stop, and neither can the planes. This is the reality of Arctic aviation. Constant vigilance, constant risk. One moment you're flying high over the ice. The next, you're hoping your plane doesn't give out before you can make it back to base. It's a dance with danger, with death always lurking just out of sight. But in the Arctic, there's no room for fear. You learn to push it aside, to focus only on the task at hand. You can't afford to think about the cold, about the crash that might be waiting for you just around the corner. The mission is all that matters. But it's hard to ignore the cold, when it's biting at your face. The wind is relentless, an ever-present companion that saps your strength, your focus, and your hope. The isolation of the Arctic makes everything feel more intense. The world here is so vast, so empty, that you start to feel small, insignificant, like a grain of sand in the middle of an endless desert. The cold never relents. It's not just a physical sensation, it's an emotional one too. It gnaws at your resolve, wears down your spirit, and slowly, steadily, begins to break you down from the inside. Flying in the Arctic isn't like flying anywhere else. It's a game of survival. Even the most experienced pilots know the stakes. You can't afford to get complacent, not for a single second. Your life depends on your ability to adapt, to overcome the freezing temperatures, the shifting winds, and the ever-present threat of mechanical failure. Every mission is a risk, every flight a gamble. You've seen men go down, seen them disappear into the white wilderness, never to be seen again. The planes they flew in become part of the landscape, buried beneath the ice, waiting to be discovered by someone else someday. But even as the cold claws at you, there's a strange sense of camaraderie here. You've learned to rely on each other, to trust the men and women who fight alongside you. There's no room for ego in the Arctic. Out here, you're part of something bigger, something more important than your own survival. It's the collective effort that gets everyone through the day. You can't fly these missions alone, and the same goes for the men on the ground, who work tirelessly to keep the planes in the air. Together, you're all part of this strange, frozen community, one that depends on each other to survive. You've also learned that the Arctic has a way of humbling you. It doesn't matter how skilled you are, how experienced you may be, the environment here will always be more powerful than you. It's a reminder that nature doesn't care about your plans, your missions, or your aspirations. All that matters is your ability to endure, to outlast the elements. When you're in the Arctic, you're not the one in control. The cold is dot. Every day in the Arctic feels like a test of willpower. You question your sanity at times. Why did you sign up for this? What made you think you could survive in such a place? The answer, of course, is duty. Duty to your country, to your comrades, and to the mission. It's the one thing that keeps you going when everything else seems impossible. The worst part of all, the constant uncertainty. You never know what each mission will bring. The weather could shift in an instant. Visibility could drop to zero, and mechanical failures could strike without warning. It's an unpredictable world, one that keeps you on edge at all times. And when you're not flying, you're waiting for the next storm, the next call to action. The silence is deafening. The stillness of the frozen world around you only makes the waiting worse, but there's nothing you can do. The mission must continue, and so must you. And so, day after day, you keep flying. You rise above the ice, pushing through the blizzards and the cold, with nothing but your training and your will to survive to guide you. The risks are ever present, but you've learned to live with them, to accept them. After all, in the Arctic, survival is a victory. Flying in the Arctic presented more than just a psychological challenge. It was a true test of the machines themselves. The planes that were used in these high-latitude missions were often more than a little outdated. As the war raged on, newer and more sophisticated aircraft were developed. But when it came to the extreme conditions of the Arctic, these high-tech wonders weren't always the best fit. The early planes used in the region were workhorses, old, reliable, and simple, but that didn't mean they were built for the cold. In fact, the extreme conditions often pushed them to their very limits. The first thing you notice when you climb into one of these planes is how basic everything feels. The cockpit is cramped. The instruments are minimal, and there's a distinct lack of creature comforts. There's no room to breathe, let alone think about the luxury of advanced technology. Instead, you rely on the basics: control levers, fuel gauges, and manual instruments. It's functional, but at the same time, it feels as if the plane itself is already struggling against the Arctic conditions. The engine is perhaps the most critical component, and it's a challenge in itself. In the coldest parts of the Arctic, engines don't just work, they freeze. The oil thickens, the metal contracts, and the engine doesn't run as smoothly. You'd often find yourself waiting for the engine to warm up, praying that it wouldn't sputter and stall in the middle of a flight. It's a waiting game. If the engine starts, you're good to go. If it doesn't, you're stuck, and you know that every minute spent idling under the Arctic sky is a minute closer to freezing to death. And once you're airborne, you know that every hour in the sky puts more strain on the engine. If something goes wrong in these temperatures, you're far from help. Fuel was another major problem. Arctic temperatures are so low that standard aviation fuel freezes, becoming thick and unusable. It would have to be specially treated, and sometimes even heated, just to keep it flowing. The mechanics on the ground would often have to bring in extra fuel, and each plane would be carefully monitored for fuel usage to avoid running out mid-flight. The moment you take off, you're fighting the clock as much as the elements. You have to keep track of every drop of fuel, every minute spent in the air, and the weather constantly threatening to turn against you. But even more than the mechanical issues, there was the struggle with visibility. The constant fog, ice clouds, and the shimmering, blinding glare off the snow could obscure everything in an instant. These early planes had poor radar, and navigation relied heavily on landmarks when there were any to speak of. But in the Arctic, landmarks are few and far between. The landscape is a sea of white, with little to distinguish one part from another. Without the help of sophisticated technology, a pilot was essentially on their own, trying to navigate through a featureless, ever-changing world. You quickly realized that the Arctic was the ultimate test of both pilot and machine. Each flight was a delicate balance of skill, luck, and perseverance. Even with the best training, even with the most reliable aircraft, there was always something that could go wrong. The weather could change on a dime, the engine could fail, and the terrain could surprise you. And when things went wrong, there wasn't much room for error. If you were flying alone, your chances of survival dropped dramatically. But despite all these limitations, the planes did have a certain resilience to them. The simplicity of the aircraft was, in many ways, an advantage. The fewer parts there were to break, the fewer things that could go wrong. In a world where repairs were often difficult or impossible, this simplicity was a saving grace. It wasn't about having the fastest, most advanced planes. It was about having something that could endure, that could keep flying even when everything else was falling apart. The airframes were tough, designed to handle rough landings and turbulent skies. The metal, though sometimes prone to freezing in the cold, could still withstand a significant amount of wear and tear. This was crucial, especially when you were forced to land in the middle of nowhere, or when you had to make an emergency landing in a snowdrift. The planes might not have been the most advanced, but they could take a beating and keep going. In a world of extremes, that was something you could count on. Yet, despite all the advantages of simplicity, there was always the looming reality of just how limited these planes were. You could never escape the cold, no matter how well you prepared. The engines were temperamental, the fuel was unpredictable, and the landscape was treacherous. In the Arctic, even the best plane was just a temporary solution to a much bigger problem. You could make it work for a while, but you were always up against the clock. The pilots knew this, of course. They knew that every mission was a gamble. You climbed into the cockpit with the understanding that the odds were never truly in your favor. The planes, despite their resilience, were not invincible. You trusted your training, you trusted your crew, and you trusted your instincts. But even then, you were always aware of the limitations that surrounded you. This was a place where even the most prepared could fall, and where success was measured not by how many missions you completed, but by how long you could keep flying. Before the elements soar, your plane brought you down. And that was what it came down to: survival. The planes were only as good as the men who flew them. And the Arctic was a reminder that the best technology in the world couldn't solve the most fundamental problem. No matter how many miles you flew, the cold was always waiting for you when you landed. It was inescapable. But for now, as you sit in the cockpit, staring out at the snow-blasted world below, you focus on the task at hand. You've got a mission to complete, and no matter how much you question your aircraft, you know it's the only thing that's going to get you home. The Arctic is a vast, unforgiving place. It's easy to imagine how planes, pilots, and crews vanished without a trace. The icy wilderness doesn't just swallow aircraft, conceals them, entombs them beneath a thick layer of snow and ice, making it nearly impossible to recover anything once it's gone. The worst part is that no one really knew where these planes went. There were no roads to follow, no landmarks to guide the way. When a plane went down in the Arctic, it was often gone forever. The ground crews, the other pilots, and even the families back home could only guess at what happened. The planes seemed to just disappear into the white abyss. There's something haunting about a plane lost in the Arctic. A plane crash, even in the harshest of environments, is still a crash. You can find pieces of wreckage. You can look for survivors. But in the Arctic, there was no guarantee that even the wreckage would be found. The snow would bury it, the wind would cover it, and the landscape would swallow it whole. Sometimes, all that was left was a small memorial to the lost, a vague mark on the map. You couldn't search for the wreckage because you couldn't see it. Everything was covered in snow and ice. When a plane went down in these conditions, the chances of recovery were slim to none. One of the most frustrating aspects of these disappearances was that many of these planes were relatively close to base. The pilots had been within reach of safety, but the conditions were so extreme that they never made it back. In one notable case, a B-17 bomber went down just miles from an airbase. But despite the efforts of rescue teams, it was never found. It was as if the Arctic itself decided it didn't want to give up the plane. You can only imagine the feeling of helplessness that would settle in as you watched your comrades disappear into the white void, knowing there was nothing you could do. But the planes weren't the only things that vanished. Pilots, too, were often lost without a trace. For every plane that crashed, there was a pilot who didn't make it home. The Arctic didn't care about rank or skill. It claimed everyone equally. Experienced pilots, fresh recruits, and ground crew alike all fell victim to the icy grip of the region. The crash sites were usually so remote that by the time anyone could get there, the wreckage had been buried by the relentless snowfall. Even if the plane's wreckage was found, there was often no sign of the pilot. Sometimes, the bodies would be found days, weeks, or even months later, frozen and lifeless, left to the mercy of the unforgiving weather. In these dark moments, you realize the true isolation of the Arctic. There's no rescue, there's no safety net. If you're down, you're on your own. In some cases, it wasn't just the crash itself that caused the death, it was the fight against the cold. The pilots and air crews had little chance to survive once they were stranded. Their survival gear, though vital, was often insufficient for the conditions. A few hours outside in the open air without shelter, and even the strongest man could succumb to hypothermia. The ground crew worked tirelessly to recover lost planes, but often they had to contend with the same elements that had claimed the aircraft in the first place. Their efforts, too, were often in vain. But even when a plane wasn't fully lost, it was found after a crash the Arctic took its toll. There was no real chance of recovery unless you were able to retrieve it quickly. Planes that had crashed into the ice, sometimes just days earlier, were often impossible to fix. The sub-zero temperatures would freeze parts of the aircraft, making it difficult to disassemble or repair. The engines were damaged by the cold, the wiring snapped, and everything that could go wrong usually did. Even if the aircraft was partially salvageable, the extreme conditions made it nearly impossible to bring the planes back to life. So many planes were abandoned on the ice, left to become relics of war, resting quietly beneath the snow, their presence almost forgotten by time. There's something oddly poetic about the idea of these planes, their pilots and crews, becoming part of the landscape lost to history. These were machines built for war, but in the Arctic, they were just another casualty of nature. The cold didn't care about the context of the war or the men flying these planes. In the end, it was just the Arctic's vast, indifferent cold that claimed them. And for those who managed to survive the brutal conditions, the loss of their comrades and their aircraft was a constant reminder of how fragile life really was. When you stop to think about it, the sheer scale of the losses in the Arctic is staggering. The stories of the lost planes of the men who were never found are haunting reminders of what it meant to fight in that remote, frozen wasteland. For every plane that returned, there was one that was lost forever. And the stories of those who vanished are often the hardest to tell because there's so little to go on. Just a name, a mission, and an empty space where their plane should have landed. The men who flew these planes became ghosts of the war, their stories frozen in time. The wrecks are still out there, scattered across the Arctic tundra. Some are still buried beneath feet of snow and ice, waiting to be rediscovered. When planes are found decades later, the sight of them is almost eerie, frozen monuments to men who were willing to face the ultimate risk. Their courage lives on in the wreckage, in the stories that get passed down from generation to generation, of those brave souls who flew into the heart of the storm and disappeared. As you sit on the frozen ground, surrounded by the wreckage of one such plane, you can't help but think about the pilot who once flew it. What was it like in the cockpit when things started to go wrong? Was he prepared for the cold that would swallow him up? Or was he like so many others, just trying to make it back to base before the Arctic claimed him to? These are the questions that linger long after the wreckage has been recovered. They're the questions that define the legacy of the lost planes, their crews, their fates, and the cold that claimed them. The icy grip of the Arctic is one that never lets go. Imagine, for a moment, that you've just crashed in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by an endless stretch of snow. Your plane is wrecked, mangled by the brutal impact, and you're trapped. Your body aching, your mind racing. The cold quickly sets in, numbing your extremities, making it harder to think, harder to move. You can't afford to panic, but the isolation is suffocating. Every minute feels like an eternity. When a plane went down in the Arctic, survival wasn't just about waiting for rescue, it was about using every ounce of resourcefulness to make it through. The first challenge, of course, was the cold. Even in the best of circumstances, the Arctic cold could freeze you solid in a matter of hours. The harsh winds could strip away whatever warmth you had left, and the icy landscape offered no shelter. You're exposed. vulnerable to the relentless cold that eats away at you with every breath you take. The moment you crash, you need to assess your surroundings. The first step is to secure yourself in some form of shelter, but that's easier said than done in the Arctic. There are no trees or caves to crawl into for warmth. The snowdrifts that cover the landscape may appear soft, but they're deceptive. Beneath the powdery surface, the ground is frozen solid. Even the best pilot couldn't simply dig a hole and expect to survive. No, you would need to find something more substantial to shield you from the elements your plane itself, if possible. But the wreckage doesn't always offer much protection. A broken wing or cracked fuselage might provide some temporary cover, but it's not a guarantee. And as the minutes stretch into hours, the urgency only intensifies. Without shelter, you would quickly lose body heat. Your body would try to compensate by shivering, by making futile attempts to generate warmth, but in the end, it wouldn't be enough. If you don't act fast, hypothermia will take hold. If you've survived long enough to start thinking about rescue, you have to face the truth. There might be no one coming. The Arctic is a vast and unforgiving place, and search teams might not be able to find you in time. The sheer remoteness of the crash site could mean that no one even knows you're missing. This realization is the hardest to accept. You're on your own, with only your survival training to guide you. Your second challenge is food and water, or, more accurately, the lack of them. Most Arctic pilots were trained to last for at least 24 to 48 hours with minimal rations. The goal was to make it long enough to either get found or make it back to base. But when you're stuck in the middle of a snowstorm, lost in the wilderness, food becomes a luxury. Your survival kit, which included a few high-energy rations, could buy you some time, but it wouldn't last forever. Water, too, is scarce. You could melt snow to drink, but you had to be careful. Eating snow, while it might seem like a solution, can actually lower your body temperature, speeding up the onset of hypothermia. You needed to melt the snow first, an effort that might be impossible without the right tools. You've got your gear, a standard flight suit, gloves, a helmet, but the frigid air makes every layer feel inadequate. The real key to survival is staying warm, and you'll quickly learn that your flight suit won't be enough. You can't just huddle for warmth. You have to move to keep your blood circulating. The cold attacks from every angle, seeping into your boots, numbing your fingers, freezing your face. You have to keep yourself active to stay alive. But what happens when the physical energy runs out? What happens when you're so exhausted, so cold, that you don't feel like moving anymore? In these situations, the mental battle begins. The Arctic is not just a test of your body's endurance, it's a battle of willpower. How long can you keep yourself going, even when the world around you seems intent on taking you down? There's an old saying in the Arctic, the cold doesn't kill you, it's the will to survive that goes first. And in many ways, that's true. The cold is unrelenting, but it's the sense of isolation, the crushing loneliness, that wears away at your resolve. When you can no longer feel your fingers or your toes, and when the only sound you hear is the howling wind, it's easy to lose hope. But survival doesn't just depend on physical endurance, it's about resourcefulness. In some cases, the wreckage of your plane might offer more than just shelter. Pieces of the aircraft could be used to make rudimentary tools or to build a fire if you have the skill and the knowledge. The mechanics of the plane itself are often adapted into survival tactics: fuel tanks used to store water, engine parts repurposed to provide warmth or create shelter. These are the small things that could mean the difference between life and death. The Arctic doesn't offer a chance for second chances. but it gives you the tools to fight back. You just have to know how to use them. As hours pass, you start to feel the effects of the cold even more. Your body is slowing down, your energy reserves are running low, and it's becoming harder to keep your mind focused. If you're lucky, you'll see a search team eventually. But even if they do find you, it could be days before they can reach you. The weather is unpredictable, and any attempt to recover you is fraught with its own dangers. The truth is, you may never be found. Still, there's a strange sense of pride in pushing through, in surviving when the odds are stacked against you. You've heard stories of pilots who were lost for days, who fought through the cold, through starvation, through exhaustion. Some of them made it back to base, telling tales of their survival. Others weren't so lucky. But in this brutal environment, every moment spent alive feels like a small victory. It's about enduring, about refusing to give in to the cold, about holding on to that small spark of hope that somehow, someway, you'll make it out of the Arctic alive. The true test of survival in the Arctic isn't just about being physically capable, it's about refusing to let the cold win. No matter how brutal, how harsh the environment, you keep going. Because, in the end, the only thing that will get you through this is your will to live. When you think about the Arctic, the first thing that comes to mind is the cold. But the real danger lies in something far more unpredictable: the weather. It can change without warning, transforming from calm to violent in a matter of minutes. The weather isn't just a backdrop to the mission, it is the mission. Every time you step into the cockpit, you know that the skies might not be what you expect, and the ground below might disappear under a blanket of snow and ice. In the Arctic, a single storm could end a flight before it even began. As you prepare for your mission, the first thing you check is the weather report, though you've learned not to rely too heavily on it. The weather in the Arctic is notoriously difficult to predict, and even the best forecasts can fall apart when faced with the harsh, capricious nature of this frozen wasteland. What you get is an educated guess at best. The next storm could be right around the corner, or it could already be on top of you. Either way, it's up to you to deal with it once you're in the air. The first sign of a storm is often a slight shift in the wind. You've learned to notice the subtleties, the way the air feels heavier, how the clouds start to gather. It's almost like the Arctic itself is holding its breath, waiting for the storm to hit. But there's no time to hesitate. The mission is set, and once you're in the air, there's no turning back. You can feel the difference in the atmosphere. Something is coming, but there's no way to know how bad it will be until it hits. The moment the storm hits, everything changes. You're flying blind. Visibility drops to zero, and the world around you is reduced to nothing but white and gray. It's not snowflakes falling gently from the sky. It's like the sky itself is being torn apart by the wind, a swirling, chaotic mess of ice and snow. Your instruments flicker and struggle to maintain function. The wind howls, pushing against the aircraft, making it feel like you're fighting a force much bigger than yourself. Every movement of the plane is a battle against the elements. The Arctic winds are relentless, tearing at the wings, tugging at the fuselage, making the aircraft feel as if it's about to break apart, and the coldest like nothing you've ever felt before. The temperatures drop even further, and the icy air seems to freeze everything it touches. The fuel lines thicken, the oil congeals, and the metal of the plane contracts, making every part of the aircraft feel stiff, uncooperative. The engine struggles against the cold, as if it too is fighting for survival. You're constantly monitoring the gauges, but even then, you know the plane could give out at any second. The temperature is so low that even the simplest components freeze, and the aircraft becomes an unpredictable beast, more likely to betray you than help you. There's a feeling of helplessness when you're caught in the storm. You can't outrun it, you can't outmaneuver it. The only thing you can do is ride it out, praying that the storm will pass and that you'll make it through in one piece. There's no clear horizon, no clear path. It's just you, your plane, and the storm. If you can't stay on course, you risk drifting into the wrong territory, or worse, running out of fuel or being forced to make an emergency landing in the middle of nowhere. You've heard the stories of pilots who got lost in storms, their planes flying off course and disappearing into the endless white. The Arctic doesn't care if you're a trained pilot or a novice. It will swallow you whole just the same. The storms don't differentiate between experienced airmen and fresh recruits. Once you're caught in the Arctic storm, it's a game of chance, of survival. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you'll make it through, barely. But sometimes, the storm wins, and that's the end of the mission, and sometimes, the end of the pilot. There's a certain type of pilot that the Arctic breeds, the kind who understands that they are at the mercy of forces far greater than themselves. The pilots who survive here learn to respect the weather, to work with it, not against it. Every mission becomes a calculated risk. You can plan all you want, but in the end, you're still just a speck in the vast, frozen wilderness, hoping. The storm won't destroy you. The Arctic doesn't care about your plans, your strategy, or your experience. It doesn't even care about your survival. It's indifferent to everything but its own icy power. But the pilots press on. Even when the weather seems impossible, they continue flying. It's part of the mentality. The mission must be completed. You don't have time to dwell on how bad the weather is. The stakes are too high. You've got a job to do, and no matter how hard the winds blow or how low the visibility drops, you have to keep going. You have no choice but to trust your training, trust the plane, and trust your gut if you're lucky. The storm will pass, and you'll find yourself back in calmer skies. You'll have a sense of relief, of accomplishment, but it's fleeting. The next storm is always out there, waiting. The cold will never truly leave, and in the back of your mind, you know that one day, one of those storms will be your last. But for now, you fly on, braving the elements, flying through the impossible, knowing that the Arctic will never stop testing you. It's a strange thing, living on the edge like this. One minute, you're gliding smoothly through the sky. The next, you're at the mercy of a storm that could take everything from you. But that's the nature of flying in the Arctic. It's a place where control is an illusion, and the only way to survive is to keep fighting, to keep flying, no matter what. The Arctic doesn't just challenge you with the cold and the storm, it holds its own hidden dangers, lurking beneath the surface. If the freezing temperatures, mechanical failures, and endless snow weren't enough, there are countless other hazards that can catch even the most seasoned pilots off guard. The landscape itself, seemingly unyielding and barren, is a trap waiting to spring. There's no place for a pilot to hide when things go wrong. The elements don't just freeze your body, they test your mind, constantly reminding you that survival in this world is a daily battle. One of the first hidden dangers you learn to respect is the Arctic's geography. From the sky, the landscape seems uniform, vast, unbroken stretches of snow and ice. But as you fly over it, you begin to see the cracks. The glaciers, thick with centuries of ice, shift and move, carving deep crevasses in the land. These cracks are invisible from above, easily hidden beneath layers of snow. A plane that's just a few inches off course could plunge straight into one of these gaping chasms. disappearing without a trace. And the worst part, the crevasses can appear out of nowhere, without warning. They're not marked on any map, and there's no way to predict where the ice will crack. One minute, you're soaring through the sky, and the next, your plane is plummeting into the depths of the earth. Even if you manage to avoid the crevasses, you can't relax. The ground beneath you is always shifting, cracking, and settling, and the risk of landing in an unstable area is ever present. This is where the Arctic landscape plays tricks on your senses. It's easy to mistake one stretch of snow for another. The monotony of the white landscape, broken only by occasional hills or ridgelines, creates an illusion of familiarity. The blizzards and the wind, too, can obscure your vision. The clouds may swirl, making everything appear like a blank canvas, offering no real frame of reference. You have to fight to keep your bearings, to trust your instruments more than your eyes. It's a disorienting experience, and it takes everything you have to push through it. The weather, too, hides its dangers. One of the most insidious threats in the Arctic is the wind. It doesn't just chill you, it picks up the snow and turns it into a blinding force. Whiteout conditions can appear in an instant where you can't see anything in front of you. There's no horizon, no distinct landmarks. It's like flying blind, without any reference point. You don't even know which way is up. You've heard the stories of pilots who were caught in these whiteouts, their planes spiraling out of control, unable to see anything but snow. The Arctic, in its ruthless simplicity, can strip away all sense of direction, leaving you utterly lost. The wind, with its freezing cold bite, can be a deadly force, pushing you into ice sheets, throwing you off course, and leaving you in the dark about your vocation. But if the wind isn't enough, the Arctic also has another deadly secret: the ice itself. The frozen surface of the Arctic might seem solid, but it's often deceptively fragile. The snow that blankets the land hides thin layers of ice, covering water, rocks, and cracks. In some places, the ice can be only a few inches thick, unable to support the weight of a plane, and in other areas, it could be solid enough to cause the entire plane to sink in moments. The ice beneath you doesn't always behave the way you expect, and one wrong move could send you plummeting into the freezing water below, a fate that would be almost impossible to survive. The Arctic's waters are treacherous. Even if you manage to survive a crash, if you find yourself in the frigid ocean beneath, your chances of making it out alive are slim. The cold is instantaneous, numbing your limbs in seconds. It's impossible to fight the freezing water for long. If the ice beneath you breaks, you don't just face a crash, you face an icy tomb. The frigid waters offer no mercy, and the struggle to escape them can drain your energy faster than anything else. And when you're in the middle of the Arctic, help is far away. No one can hear your calls for rescue. You're on your own, and the cold is the only answer you'll get, even if you make it back to solid ground. The land itself is unforgiving. The Arctic, despite its pristine beauty, is full of dangers that can't be seen from a distance. The snow-covered landscape might look serene, but it's filled with hidden hazards. From shifting ice to deep, frozen ravines, every step on the ground is a calculated risk. The only thing you can rely on is your training, your instincts, and your will to survive. There's another hidden peril that no one talks about: the mental toll of surviving in this frozen hell. The isolation is suffocating. The constant cold wears down on you, breaking not just your body, but your mind. You can go days without seeing another soul, and the vast, empty landscape becomes oppressive. It's not just the physical danger that gets to you, it's the feeling that there's no escape, no respite from the endless snow, no end to the cold. The Arctic has a way of getting into your head, making you question everything you thought you knew about survival. The loneliness here isn't just physical, it cuts deeper into your very soul. You learn to rely on your comrades, the few others who are as battered and worn as you, but even that isn't enough. The vastness of the place becomes a weight you carry with you every time you fly. At some point, you stop being afraid of the cold, of the ice, of the storm. You start to fear the quiet, the endless white silence that surrounds you. It's this quiet that becomes the true danger, the mind-numbing, soul-crushing isolation that gnaws at you when everything else fades away. It's here, in the freezing expanse of the Arctic, where the real battle begins. It's not against the elements, but against your own mind. You're left alone with your thoughts, fighting to stay sane in a place that seems to have no end, no escape. While the pilots fly high above the frozen wasteland, risking everything to complete their missions, the true unsung heroes of the Arctic War remain on the ground. It's easy to forget about the men and women who work tirelessly, often in the shadow of the pilots, to ensure that the planes stay in the sky. The ground crews face their own battle in the Arctic one against the same elements, the same relentless cold, and the same risk of failure. Without them, the pilots wouldn't even be able to take off, let alone survive the extreme conditions. Every day, the ground crews wake up to face the same frigid temperatures, the same bone-chilling winds. They work tirelessly in freezing conditions, often with little recognition or even a sense of reward. Their job isn't just about keeping the planes running, it's about keeping the pilots alive. From refueling aircraft to ensuring that every part of the plane is operational, every task requires careful attention to detail, quick thinking, and a level of physical endurance that most can't comprehend. But it's not just the mechanical work that makes them invaluable, their ability to adapt to the unique challenges of the Arctic. The aircraft in use weren't designed for the harsh conditions, and keeping them running required constant modifications. Ground crews had to find innovative ways to keep the planes warm, using heating pads or improvising with whatever tools and materials were available. The machinery, which was already difficult to operate, became even more temperamental in the cold, and mechanics would often have to spend hours under the planes, working with frozen metal and equipment that barely functioned. The engines would freeze in the sub-zero temperatures, making repairs an impossible task without quick thinking. Yet, these crews would persevere, knowing that the fate of the pilots and their own survival depended on their success. There's a certain quiet resilience in the work of the ground crews. They never complain, never ask for more recognition. They simply show up day after day, performing the essential behind-the-scenes tasks that keep the Arctic operations running. They work in the shadows of the pilots, repairing engines, replacing parts, and preparing the planes for another flight. Yet without them, the pilots would be helpless. Every flight, every mission is a direct result of the dedication of the ground crews, who spend hours making sure the planes are fit for takeoff. The cold isn't kind to the mechanics either. Their hands are raw from the icy metal, their faces cracked and windburned from exposure. But they keep going. Their work is physical, relentless, and often dangerous. If something goes wrong during a refueling operation, or if a piece of equipment fails while in use, there's no one to call for help. These men and women must trust in their own skill and experience to handle the situation. Their ability to stay calm under pressure is what makes them indispensable. You can hear it in the conversations of the pilots, the subtle acknowledgement of the efforts of the ground crews. They know that every mission begins and ends with these Unsung heroes. The planes might fly in the Arctic sky, but without the ground crews ensuring that they're operational, the flights wouldn't even happen. It's a symbiotic relationship between the pilots and the mechanics, a relationship built on trust, mutual respect, and an unspoken understanding that they all share the same goal: survival. In the midst of the chaos of war, the ground crews often remain invisible, their stories untold. They don't get the accolades, the glory, or the headlines that the pilots do. But without them, the missions would fail. Without them, the pilots would be stranded, alone in the unforgiving wilderness, with no hope of escape. The ground crews are the lifeblood of Arctic aviation. Their work is a quiet, constant force that ensures the mission continues, no matter the weather, no matter the odds, and in the depths of winter, when the temperature drops even further, the ground crews are still out there, working tirelessly. They don't get the luxury of waiting for a warm fire or a meal in the mess hall. Their reward is the knowledge that they're part of something bigger, that their efforts are crucial to the survival of those they serve. And when a plane takes off, when the pilots soar into the sky and complete another mission, it's a small victory for the ground crews as well. They know that their work has kept the planes in the air, that their hands have touched every part of the machine, and that their contribution is just as important as the pilots in the sky. You can't help but feel a sense of awe when you think about these men and women. Their work is thankless, relentless, and often ignored. Yet, in the harshest environment known to man, they continue to show up day after day, ensuring that the mission keeps moving forward. The Arctic is a place that can break the spirit of even the strongest, but not for the ground crews. They face the same challenges as the pilots, but without the same recognition, and yet they are as vital to the mission's success as the pilots themselves. There is no greater symbol of resilience than the ground crews in the Arctic. They represent the unsung heroes who keep the wheels of war turning in one of the most extreme environments on Earth. Without their unwavering determination and dedication, the pilots would have nothing to fly, and the missions would come to a halt. They are the backbone of Arctic aviation, the invisible force that makes survival possible. In the Arctic, losing a plane is almost an inevitability. It doesn't matter how skilled the pilots are or how carefully the planes are maintained. The unpredictable elements of the region are more than capable of bringing even the most robust aircraft down. The real challenge, though, begins after the crash. Recovery in this frozen wilderness is an arduous, often impossible task. The icy expanse has a way of erasing the evidence of downed planes, hiding them beneath the snow and ice, like forgotten relics of war. For every crash site that's discovered, there are countless others that remain lost forever, entombed in the unforgiving landscape. When a plane goes down in the Arctic, the clock starts ticking immediately. Unlike other environments, where recovery efforts can be initiated quickly, the Arctic presents a unique set of obstacles that complicate even the simplest of tasks. The terrain is vast and featureless. The snow can be knee-deep or drifted up in mountainous layers. The cold, meanwhile, makes it nearly impossible to work for long periods without risking frostbite or hypothermia. And the worst part, the wind. The same winds that made flying so dangerous in the first place would only serve to complicate recovery efforts. They push snow into deep drifts, burying wreckage in a matter of hours, if not minutes. Recovery operations often began immediately after the crash, but the challenges were many. The first issue was finding the wreckage. While a plane may have been visible from the sky just moments before its crash, once it hit the ground, it could disappear into a blanket of snow almost immediately, even if search teams knew the general area of the crash site, pinpointing the exact location was a daunting task. There was no visibility beyond a few feet in many cases, and the distance between potential landing zones and the crash site could be miles. Tracking down a wreck in this environment was like finding a needle in a haystack. When the wreckage was finally found, it didn't offer much hope. The cold meant that the metal of the plane had contracted and become brittle. The instruments, radios, and gauges were all likely frozen or destroyed. The mechanics had to carefully assess whether any parts of the plane were salvageable, and that's assuming the crash had left anything intact. More often than not, the plane's fuselage had crumpled under the impact, leaving nothing but twisted metal and debris. For the crews on the ground, this meant hours of painstaking work to sift through the wreckage, trying to find any parts of the plane that could be used again, even if it was just the engine or fuel tanks. The challenges weren't just about getting to the wreckage, they were about getting it back to base. Any part of a plane that could be salvaged was often hauled out by hand, piece by piece. The snow made this process even more exhausting, and the harsh winds made it dangerous. Parts of the plane had to be dug out carefully, as anything too large or heavy to carry would require a winch or sled to drag across the snow. But once again, the elements worked against the ground crews. The snow could turn into thick, frozen drifts, and every step was a battle. It was backbreaking work that demanded incredible patience, and the threat of frostbite was always looming. There were other dangers too. Sometimes the wreckage would land in places so remote that a rescue mission would take days to reach it. Weather conditions could easily halt progress, leaving crews stranded in blizzards or high winds, fighting not just to recover the plane, but to survive in the same conditions that had already claimed the pilot. And as if the cold wasn't enough, there was the ever-present risk of further mechanical failure. Vehicles, winches, sleds, all of these needed to operate in temperatures that froze fluids and made moving parts difficult to maneuver. Even the basic tools would become brittle in the cold, breaking with the slightest misstep. Recovery operations, then, were a test of endurance, innovation, and grit. But recovery wasn't just about getting the plane back. It was about retrieving any vital intelligence from the wreckage. The enemy's aircraft might carry precious reconnaissance, photos, classified documents, or other intelligence that was essential for the continuation of the war. It was imperative that the wreckage be examined carefully, as often the pilots had carried vital information about enemy movements or plans. A downed plane could be a goldmine for intelligence if it could be recovered in time, and so, after the wreckage was located, the true task began. Each part of the plane had to be carefully examined and documented, sorted for parts that could be reused or repaired, and often carried back in pieces to be reassembled later. But the process was slow, with the planes once on the ground becoming buried by the relentless snow and ice, often out of reach by the time the recovery teams could access them. Every minute spent searching was a minute spent battling the clock. How long could the recovery teams stay out there before the cold took its toll? How long before exhaustion, frostbite, or hunger forced them to abandon the mission? It was a painstaking process, one that required both physical and mental endurance. Even the most seasoned of men, trained for survival in the Arctic, could crack under the pressure of constant exposure to the elements. You couldn't just rely on your skill to find the wreckage. You had to rely on your will to keep moving forward, to fight against the cold, the wind, and the isolation. The worst part, even if the wreckage was recovered, the damage to the plane often made it unfit for further use. The The engines were frozen solid, parts of the airframe were bent beyond repair, and the electronics were often fried by the brutal conditions. The planes might have been built to withstand a lot, but not the Arctic in the end. All that was left was the metal carcass of a war machine that had succumbed to the elements. In the rare instances when the wreckage was recovered and the plane was put back into service, it was a testament to the resilience of the people who had managed to bring it back to life. The pilots and ground crews worked together, rebuilding what was left, getting the plane ready for its next flight. These moments of triumph, however small, were the ultimate proof of the spirit of survival that defined the Arctic conflict. Despite the endless obstacles, despite the relentless cold, the human will to overcome was always present. But for every success story, there were many more losses. Countless planes still buried beneath the snow, their engines frozen and their parts scattered across the tundra will never see the light of day again. They remain entombed in the icy silence, only to be discovered when the thaw comes, years or decades later. The Arctic, with all its beauty and terror, keeps its secrets well hidden. The moment you land in the Arctic, you feel the overwhelming isolation. It's not just the cold or the snow or the endless horizon of white that feels suffocating. It's the sheer emptiness of the place. Far from the bustle of civilization, isolated in the vast expanse of snow and ice, the Arctic bases were built to be functional, not comfortable. They were small, isolated outposts designed to keep the war machine running. But the men stationed there would have preferred anything but isolation. The bases themselves were little more than makeshift compounds of metal and wood, hastily erected in whatever space was available. There was no luxury in these places, no warm comforts, no easy access to supplies, or even basic needs. There were barracks, a mess hall, a small communications center, and often a workshop for repairs. But these bases were never designed to be home. They were utilitarian, built for function and survival, not for comfort. And no matter how long you stayed, you never truly got used to it. The cold was always there, creeping into your bones, reminding you of how fragile life really was. But it wasn't just the physical cold, it was the isolation that gnawed at your spirit. Out here, you were on your own. The Arctic offered no distractions, no solace. There were no other bases for miles, no cities or towns. The nearest friendly forces were often too far away to make rescue or resupply quick or easy. Even the sound of a plane taking off, or the voice of a fellow pilot, felt like a rare and precious thing. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, you learned to live with the constant awareness that help was distant and uncertain. The isolation was amplified by the endless darkness of the Arctic winter. The sun barely rose above the horizon, and when it did, it was more of a dim twilight than daylight. This polar night stretched for weeks on end, making everything feel even more desolate. You couldn't even tell the time properly. The days blurred into one long, gray fog. The lack of sunlight and the harsh environment often caused psychological stress. The isolation, combined with the cold and the never-ending darkness, played tricks on the mind. Some men would start to lose their sense of time. Others would become withdrawn, quietly battling the effects of what felt like sensory deprivation. Days felt like weeks, and the hours stretched endlessly. It was a fight to maintain any semblance of normalcy in such a hostile environment. The mental toll of being stationed in the Arctic was severe. You would start to miss the simple things, being able to walk down a street without fearing frostbite, hearing the sounds of traffic or the chatter of people. Instead, all you had was the same endless stretch of snow and ice, the same howling winds, and the same few faces. The friendships you formed here were born from necessity. They were forged in the fires of shared hardship and mutual reliance. You leaned on each other, not because you had much in common, but because you had no choice. The only thing that kept you sane in such a place was the knowledge that everyone else was in the same boat. You weren't alone, even if it felt like you were. The isolation wasn't just a mental strain, it was a physical one too. Supplies were scarce, even basic necessities were rationed, and the resupply runs were few and far between. Every shipment of food, fuel, and equipment was critical, and the weather often made it impossible to get those supplies to the base in a timely manner. When you ran low on something, you didn't just go to the store for more, you had to wait, sometimes for weeks. The men stationed in the Arctic often relied on whatever they could scrounge together. Rations were small, and fresh food was a luxury rarely afforded. The lack of supplies was a constant source of stress, and it made every day feel like an endurance test. There was no escaping the weight of isolation. You could try to distract yourself with work, with the flight missions, or even the camaraderie of fellow soldiers. But when the winds howled through the base and the snow drifted in through every crack, it was hard to shake the feeling of being cut off from the rest of the world. When the night came and the base fell silent, you would lie in your barracks, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was what it meant to truly be alone. The Arctic made you realize just how fragile the human mind really is, and how easily isolation can break a person. It wasn't just the men who were affected by this isolation. With so few mechanics and so few tools, it was often impossible to maintain the aircraft to the highest standard. The planes, already old and weathered from their missions, were pushed to the brink in the freezing temperatures. The cold didn't just damage the engines, it seeped into every part of the aircraft, wearing them down faster than they could be repaired. This made every mission feel like a gamble. You could only hope that the aircraft would hold together long enough for you to complete the mission and return safely to base. There were moments in the quiet of the Arctic night when you would find yourself questioning why you were here. Why, of all places, had you been sent to the most inhospitable environment on Earth? What had you signed up for? The Arctic was not just a place, it was an experience that changed you, that pushed you beyond what you thought was possible. It stripped away the comforts of civilization and left you with nothing but your will to survive. But even in the face of all the hardship, the isolation, and the cold, there was a strange sense of purpose that you couldn't escape. You were here because you had a job to do, and that job had to be done no matter what. When the first light of dawn broke across the icy landscape, it offered no comfort. It was a reminder that the cycle would continue another day of cold, another day of isolation. But for the men stationed here, it was also a reminder that they were still alive, still standing. The Arctic may have been trying to break them, but they refused to yield. They weren't just surviving, they were enduring. And that, in the end, was the only thing that mattered. When you step out of the shelter of the Arctic base and into the frozen wilderness, survival becomes more than a concept, it becomes an urgent reality. The cold isn't just something you have to endure, it's something you have to outsmart. Your survival in the Arctic depends on your gear, and more importantly, how you use it. Every item in your kit is carefully chosen for one purpose: to keep you alive long enough to make it back to base. And you quickly learn that in the Arctic, even the best gear is only as good as the person using it. One of the first things you'll notice when you're out in the field is how much your survival gear weighs. Everything you wear has to do double, due to protecting you from the cold, while allowing you the flexibility to do your job. Your flight suit, for example, isn't just there to keep you warm. It's also a vital tool in your fight against hypothermia. The suits are designed with multiple layers of insulation, often made of thick wool, fleece, or synthetic materials designed to trap heat. They're bulky, heavy, and not the most comfortable, but they're your first line of defense against the freezing temperatures that would otherwise sap your strength and freeze you in place. Underneath the flight suit, you wear thermal underwear made from wool or a similar insulating material. These layers help to keep your core temperature up and prevent the chill from seeping into your body. The wool traps heat even when it's wet, which is crucial in the Arctic, where the cold can make you sweat even during the most demanding activities. And it's not just about warmth, it's about mobility. The suit must allow you to move, to climb into the cockpit, to operate the plane, and, if necessary, to make an emergency landing and move through the snow. The next key component of your survival gear is your boots. They're not just ordinary boots, they're a lifeline. Insulated with thick wool lining and often coated in waterproof materials, they are built to withstand hours of trudging through snow and ice. But they're more than just warm, they're designed to keep your feet dry. In the Arctic, wet feet can be deadly. The moment your boots start to let in moisture, you know you're in trouble. The cold can quickly set in, numbing your toes, and once that happens, it's only a matter of time before frostbite takes hold. You check your boots constantly, making sure they're secure, dry, and intact. But even with the best boots and the warmest suit, the cold can still penetrate if you're not careful. That's where the heated gear comes in, an ingenious, though imperfect, addition to your kit. Many pilots would use heated vests or gloves to help fight off the freezing temperatures. These would be powered by small batteries or the plane's electrical system, but they were far from foolproof. They could fail or run out of power at the worst possible time. When that happens, you rely on the tried and true methods of the Arctic, staying active and using the other gear at your disposal. One of the most important tools you'll carry is your survival pack. It's a small, compact kit that's designed to keep you alive for up to 48 hours in the wilderness. Inside, you'll find a mix of essentials: a small first aid kit, a flare gun, a multi-tool, and often a small stove for melting snow to drink. You'll also carry small, high-energy packets that you can eat on the go. These are critical for survival. They won't taste great, but they'll keep you going. Without them, you could find yourself in serious trouble if you're stranded for too long. But perhaps the most vital piece of survival equipment is your knowledge. The gear you carry is important, but it's only effective if you know how to use it. That means understanding how to start a fire, even in the coldest of conditions, how to make shelter out of snow or ice, and how to preserve your body heat when everything around you is trying to kill you. In the Arctic, every pilot is trained to survive, not just to fly. You learn how to stay alive, how to make the most out of the limited resources you have, and how to keep your wits about you when the world feels like it's closing in. The importance of shelter cannot be overstated. If you're stranded in the Arctic, you must find a way to protect yourself from the elements. That means building a shelter, often out of snow. If you're lucky, you might have a plane wreckage to use as cover. If not, you'll need to dig into the snow to make a snow cave, which, despite sounding primitive, can provide excellent insulation. The snow's density helps trap heat, creating a warm microenvironment where you can survive until help arrives or until you're able to get yourself out. But this shelter isn't a luxury. It's a matter of life and death. The snow can be your ally or your enemy, depending on how you use it. As you settle into your shelter, You'll be thankful for one of the more unusual survival methods used in the Arctic, the buddy system. Working together with another person can make all the difference. Having someone to talk to help keep your mind occupied can stave off the loneliness and despair that comes with isolation. It can also provide a physical advantage to people, can work faster, build a shelter more efficiently, and keep each other awake and alert. In a place like the Arctic, where the mind can break just as easily as the body, the bond between fellow soldiers becomes a lifeline. And as you sit in your shelter, trying to keep warm, you remember that this is just part of the survival process. This is the Arctic where everything works against you, where every action requires effort, and where the cold is always one step behind you, waiting for you to make a mistake. But with the right gear, the right knowledge, and the right mindset, you know that you can survive. The challenge isn't about defeating the Arctic, it's about outlasting it, using every tool at your disposal to stay alive just a little longer. Because, in the end, surviving in the Arctic isn't about winning, it's about enduring. In the Arctic, every resource is precious. Food, fuel, and equipment don't just run out, they vanish. The frozen landscape is indifferent to your needs, and the supply lines that stretch back to civilization are tenuous at best. When you're out here, you learn the true meaning of scarcity. Even basic necessities become luxuries, and the supplies you once took for granted now feel like treasures, hoarded and rationed for fear they won't last through the next storm. The next long stretch of isolation, one of the first things you'll notice upon arriving at an Arctic base is how carefully supplies are managed. Every pilot, every ground crew member is aware of the ticking clock. Every shipment, no matter how small, is vital. A drop of food, a gallon of fuel, a spare part for the plane, each one is a lifeline. You've been trained to make do with less, to stretch out rations and resources. But the reality of it never truly hits you until you're out there, miles from the nearest supply drop, fighting not just the cold, but the creeping scarcity. Food is the first and most obvious issue. When you're out flying missions, you're constantly aware that the next meal could be hours or days away. In the Arctic, food doesn't just fuel your body, it fuels your will to survive. But in a place so isolated, the food supply is often limited, and once you've gone through your rationed meals, you're left with very little to sustain you. The luxury meals, like warm stew or canned goods, are rare. Instead, your meals consist of high-energy rations, small, compact blocks of protein and carbohydrate. They're designed to keep you going without taking up too much space or weight, but they don't offer much in terms of comfort. The food is functional, not satisfying, and the worst part, the cold makes it almost impossible to enjoy a warm meal. The moment you open a can, the chill begins to bite at your fingers, and you can feel the warmth of the food dissipating in seconds. The scarcity of food becomes even more apparent when the weather forces you to remain grounded for days at a time. Resupply planes are few and far between, and the weather often makes it impossible for them to get through. When a plane does finally arrive with fresh rations or other supplies, it's a small victory, a brief reprieve from the hardship. But that relief is fleeting. You know that soon the supplies will be gone again, and you'll be back to scraping by, eating whatever you can find, or rationing what's left. Even something as simple as a warm drink becomes a distant memory. The cold air sucks the life out of everything, and even the smallest meal feels like a gift. The lack of fresh supplies also affects your equipment. Every piece of gear, your flight suit, your boots, your tools, needs to be maintained. But in the Arctic, maintenance is a constant challenge. Cold temperatures freeze and warp materials, making everything from metal to fabric stiff and brittle. When a piece of gear breaks, it's not just a minor inconvenience, it's a potential life or death situation. The slightest failure of your equipment could leave you stranded, vulnerable to the elements. With spare parts in short supply, repairs are often done with whatever you can scrounge together. The ground crews have to improvise, using their limited resources to keep the planes and equipment functional. But there's only so much they can do with what they have. You've seen planes that should have been grounded, their parts too worn or damaged to keep flying, but necessity dictates that they take off anyway. The Arctic War is about surviving with what you have, no matter how worn out or ill-equipped you might be. And yet, despite the scarcity of supplies, there's a strange sense of resilience that comes from making do. You find yourself reusing everything. A torn pair of gloves might be patched up and stitched together. A broken tool could be repaired with bits of scrap metal. Even the smallest item becomes precious, something to be preserved and cherished for as long as possible. The constant cycle of rationing and improvisation builds a sense of community. You rely on each other, not just for survival, but for the shared understanding that everyone is in the same boat. The scarcity of supplies creates a bond between the pilots, the ground crews, and everyone at the base. It's a shared struggle, one that everyone faces together. But there's a dark side to all this scarcity. The mental toll it takes is harder to measure. The constant awareness that resources are limited, food, fuel, even time can eat away at your psyche. You begin to ration more than just supplies. You ration your energy, your patience, and even your hope. Each day spent without proper food or rest feels like a slow, grinding battle against your own mind. The isolation and the lack of comfort make it hard to hold on to any sense of normalcy. You stop thinking about the world beyond the Arctic. The constant struggle for survival becomes your entire reality. Your existence, in the end, becomes a calculation of how long you can make your supplies last, how long you can hold on until you're relieved or until the weather clears. The lack of proper supplies and the harsh realities of Arctic living create a sense of urgency that's difficult to shake. The days blur together. One day feels exactly like the next, a never-ending cycle of struggle against the cold, the wind, and the relentless lack of everything you need to survive. But even in this hardship, you adapt. You learn to make the best of what little you have. You learn that survival isn't just about having everything you need. It's about finding a way to keep going even when you don't. And when a resupply plane does finally arrive, it feels like a miracle. The food, the fuel, the spare parts, they're not just items on a list. They represent hope. They represent the possibility of making it another day, of completing another mission, of holding on until the Arctic gives way to something warmer, something more hospitable. But you know that relief is fleeting. Soon you'll be back to rationing, back to making do. And in the Arctic, that's all you can ever do, Meg, do and survive. In the Arctic, the night stretches on forever, a never-ending darkness that pulls you in, swallowing up everything in its path. The sun barely rises above the horizon, casting a faint glow on the endless snow, but that light never truly reaches you instead. It hangs there in the sky like a ghost, barely enough to break through the perpetual night. For weeks, you live in a world of twilight, where time seems to stand still, and the boundaries between day and night blur together. The longest nights of the year aren't just a test of endurance for the body, they are a trial of the mind. When you first arrive at the Arctic base, the absence of sunlight feels strange. You're used to the cycle of the day, the rising sun, the warmth of its rays, the rhythm of the hours passing. But here, in the frozen wastes, that rhythm is broken. The Arctic night is a silent, suffocating thing, a cold shroud that wraps around everything, casting the world into an unrelenting blackness. The first few days are disorienting. You wake up in the dark, eat in the dark, and work in the dark, and work in the dark. There's no clear delineation between night and day, only an endless stretch of cold hours. It feels like you're caught in a limbo, where the usual markers of time no longer exist. You start to feel the effects of the long night after a while. Your body aches from the lack of sunlight, and the cold seeps into your bones. Even when you're inside the base, trying to rest or eat, the chill never quite leaves. It lingers in your muscles, making it hard to relax. The darkness, too, begins to play tricks on you. Without the regular cues of sunlight and the passing of time, your mind starts to feel heavy. You lose track of what day it is. You wake up from fitful, restless sleep, unsure if it's been hours or days. The darkness has a way of messing with your sense of reality. It feels like the world has been frozen in time, and you, along with it, are just waiting for it to end. The long nights have a profound psychological impact. The Arctic isn't just cold physically, it's cold mentally too. The isolation, combined with the lack of sunlight, can cause your thoughts to spiral. You're cut off from the world, isolated from the people you know, and from the routines that ground you. You're surrounded by only a handful of people, all of you struggling to survive, to keep busy, to make sense of the world when the normal markers of time don't exist. You start to question everything, the reality of the world outside the base, your role in the war, and the passage of time itself. It's easy to lose your sense of self when you're trapped in the perpetual darkness. You learn to lean on the camaraderie of those around you, your fellow soldiers and pilots, but even that becomes strained. You can't escape the long hours of darkness, and sometimes even the warmth of your comrades doesn't feel like enough. But it's not just the mind that feels the weight of the long nights. The weather, too, becomes even more unforgiving. In the absence of sunlight, the temperatures drop further, and the winds howl with an intensity that makes everything feel sharper, colder. The longer nights bring more frequent blizzards, whiteouts, and storms, pushing the limits of your endurance. The planes sit idle in the hangars, their engines cold and stiff, waiting for the weather to clear. The ground crews work tirelessly, but even they can't keep up with the demands of a base that never sleeps. And for the pilots, the nights drag on, the silence broken only by the distant hum of a plane returning or taking off, the constant reminder that despite the darkness, the mission continues. The worst part, perhaps, is the psychological effect the night has on your perception of time. The idea of night and day becomes irrelevant. There are no long walks under the sun, no warmth of daylight to break up the hours. The endless dark makes you feel like you're in a void, disconnected from everything that used to make sense. You look out over the frozen expanse and wonder if the sun will ever come back, if it's even real at this point. The same stretch of snow, the same bleak landscape, day after day, there's nothing to break the monotony. The dark stretches on, and you're left in its grip, wondering if you'll make it out, or if you'll be swallowed by it forever. And then, just as you're starting to feel like you can't take any more of the endless cold, the world shifts. The sun begins to rise, slowly creeping above the horizon, casting a weak, pale light over the land. The first glimmer of daylight after what feels like an eternity of darkness is like a miracle. It doesn't last long, but it's enough to remind you that there's hope, that there's still a world outside the Arctic's grip. The nights may be long, but they end eventually. Even in the depths of the Arctic winter, when everything feels like it's frozen in time, you know that the sun will rise again. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, even when everything seems impossible, there's always the chance for light to break through. It's a symbol of survival in the harshest environment on Earth. Prove that, despite the weight of the endless night, you can endure, and the dawn will come. You just have to make it through the darkness first. The sun's return, brief as it may be, gives you the strength to keep going. It's a small victory, a glimmer of light in an otherwise bleak world. You've survived the longest night of the year, and with each passing day, the darkness recedes just a little more. But the Arctic night has a way of reminding you that even in the darkest of hours, there is always the potential for light. And as long as you keep going, one step after another, you'll make it to the next dawn. In the Arctic, survival is never guaranteed. It doesn't matter how many successful flights you've made or how many challenges you've overcome. One slip, one miscalculation, one moment of overconfidence, and it's all over. It's easy to become complacent when you've faced the brutal conditions of the Arctic and lived to tell the tale. After a few successful missions, you start to think you've got the hang of it, that the cold can be conquered, that the sky is always within your reach. But that's the mistake. The Arctic has a way of humbling those who think they've mastered it. The story of Lieutenant Carl Mullen is one that many pilots remember, a cautionary tale about the dangers of overconfidence. Carl had been stationed at the Arctic base for almost a year. He was known for his skill and his calm under pressure. He had flown countless missions in some of the most dangerous conditions imaginable, and each time he returned safely. His aircraft never failed him. His flight plans never went awry. He had become one of the best pilots on the base, and that reputation was something he wore like armor. But one fateful day, Carl decided to push the limits. He had been briefed on the weather conditions. It was a relatively calm day, with clear skies and light winds. The forecast didn't predict any major storms on the horizon. Carl, however, thought he could complete the mission faster than expected. He felt the confidence of someone who had already survived the harshest of conditions. He was convinced that he could push the plane further, fly faster, and finish the mission before the storm even had a chance to develop. He dismissed the warnings of his fellow pilots, who advised him to stay grounded until the weather improved. In the sky, everything seemed fine at first. Carl's plane, a rugged warbird designed to handle the elements, soared through the air with ease. But as he pushed further north, the weather began to shift. The light winds turned into heavy gusts, and the clear sky quickly became overcast. Within moments, a small storm developed into something far more dangerous. The temperature plummeted, the winds howled, and the snow began to fall in sheets, reducing visibility to near zero. By the time Carl realized how quickly the conditions had deteriorated, it was too late. His aircraft, pushed beyond its limits, began to struggle against the wind. The cold crept into the engine, slowing it down. The plane's systems started to freeze, and Carl, still overconfident, fought to keep control. His instincts were good, but the Arctic had no mercy. He tried to navigate through the whiteout, but the storm's intensity made everything feel distorted. He had lost his bearings. He couldn't see the ground. He couldn't see anything but the swirling, blinding snow. Carl's plane came down, hard, crashing into the snow-covered terrain with a sickening thud. The impact threw him against his restraints, and everything went black dot. By the time the rescue crews found him, it was too late. He had been exposed to the extreme cold for hours, and despite his skill, his overconfidence had been his undoing. His body was found frozen, his face frozen in a grimace, his hands still clutching the controls, as if he could still fight the storm. He had flown so many successful missions that he had let his guard down. He had underestimated the Arctic, thinking that his experience could outmatch the brutality of the environment. In the end, the storm had taken him. Carl's story became a reminder to everyone at the base that the Arctic had a way of humbling even the most skilled. No one was immune to its power. Overconfidence was a luxury you couldn't afford in this place. The cold, the wind, the isolation, they didn't care how experienced you were. They were always waiting for you to slip up, for you to make one fatal mistake. For Carl, that mistake was believing that he could outsmart the Arctic. The harsh reality of the Arctic is that survival is never guaranteed. No matter how many times you've flown through the storms, no matter how many successful missions you've completed, the cold is an unpredictable force. One wrong move, one moment of distraction, and the Arctic will take everything from you. The lesson was clear. Never let your guard down. Always respect the environment, because the Arctic has a way of finding your weaknesses and exploiting them. It doesn't care about your reputation, your skill, or your past success. It's indifferent, relentless, and unforgiving. But there's something else you learn in the Arctic: the value of humility. You learn that survival isn't about bravado, and it isn't about confidence. It's about adaptability. It's about understanding your limitations and recognizing when to push forward and when to retreat. You learn to listen to the warnings, weather reports, the advice from fellow pilots, the little voice in your head that tells you something isn't quite right. In the Arctic, you don't fight the environment. You learn to work with it, to move cautiously, to respect its power. And when you look back at Carl's story, you can't help but feel the weight of his mistake. It's a story that serves as a constant reminder. No matter how experienced you are, no matter how many flights you've completed, you're always at the mercy of the Arctic's unpredictability. Overconfidence is a luxury, and in this place, it's a dangerous one. The real heroes are the ones who know when to listen to the environment, when to hold back, and when to take the safest course of action. Surviving in the Arctic isn't about bravery or skill, it's about survival, about knowing when to be cautious, when to respect the power of nature, and when to let go of the illusion that you're in control. Carl's story is a sobering reminder that in this frozen wasteland, no one is invincible. Surviving a crash in the Arctic is only half the battle. The true challenge begins once you've made it back to base, or, in the case of those who survive long enough to return from a crash, once you've fought your way through the brutal cold, starvation, and exhaustion. The Arctic doesn't just punish you once, it continues to test you, to wear you down in ways that are both physical and psychological. You've lost your plane, you've survived the cold, but you now face a different kind of fight, returning to the sky. The moment you make it back to base, you're no longer just a survivor, you're a testament to the resilience of human willpower. The men and women who make it back after a crash don't just return physically wounded, they return mentally scarred, having fought against both the Arctic and themselves. The cold, the isolation, the hunger, all of these things leave marks that don't heal as easily as physical wounds. But still, they climb out of the wreckage, battered and bruised, and they're expected to do it all again. The first thing that hits you after being rescued is the return to normalcy. Such a thing can be called normal in the Arctic. You're back in the base, surrounded by familiar faces, but you're different. You've stared into the face of the Arctic's wrath and come back from the brink. And yet, You feel like you've left a piece of yourself behind in the frozen wilderness. But this is what you signed up for, right? To fly, to fight, to survive. The mission isn't over. It's never over. Once you're physically able, the question becomes not whether you can fly again, but whether you want to. You've been through a traumatic experience, one that leaves you scarred both inside and out. Every time you step into the cockpit again, the memory of the crash will be there, lurking in the back of your mind. You'll relive those moments of panic, of helplessness, of trying to control a machine that fought against you. The fear is there, creeping in, but you can't afford to acknowledge it. You've learned how to suppress it, to push past it, because the mission isn't finished. You can't afford to falter. The mechanics at the base work tirelessly to repair your plane, or, more often, to scrounge together enough spare parts to get it flying again. The Arctic's harsh conditions have a way of taking a toll on aircraft. What was once a gleaming machine of war is now battered, bruised, and frozen solid. Every part of it has been pushed to its limits. Every engine, every control system, every instrument has been tested by the brutal cold. But somehow, against all odds, they put it back together. The plane may not look like much, but it's ready for takeoff once more. For you, it's more than just getting back into the sky. It's about proving something to yourself. You're not just returning to duty. You're reclaiming a part of yourself that was lost when you crashed. The fear that holds you back, the trauma that tries to take root in your mind, it's all there, but you push forward. The Arctic has tried to break you, but you refuse to let it. You will climb back into that cockpit. You will fly again, and you will survive. The first flight after a crash is always the hardest. You've been on the ground long enough to feel the weight of your injuries, your fears, and your doubts. The moment you strap yourself in and rev the engines, everything comes flooding back. The shaking hands, the pounding heart, the memories of the crash. But you don't have time to dwell on it. You focus on the instruments in front of you, the rhythm of the engine, the routine of the takeoff. You focus on getting the plane back in the air. As you take off, you're reminded of the true power of flight. The Arctic, with all its dangers, is still a place where planes can conquer the sky. You feel the rush of wind against the fuselage, the steady hum of the engine, the tension in your muscles as you climb. In the air, you're free. The cold, the isolation, the crash, they're all behind you now. You've made it back to where you belong. But even after you take off, the Arctic doesn't let go that easily. The plane is still a fragile machine, subject to the whims of the weather and the harsh elements. Every mission, every flight, is a reminder of how fragile life is in this place. But you've made it this far, and that's something. The fear, the doubts, they never truly go away. But you learn to live with them, to work through them, to continue flying despite the overwhelming odds. As you soar through the Arctic skies, you realize that the true test is not how many times you've flown or how many times you've made it back from a crash. It's about the ability to keep going, to endure, and to keep rising above the storms. You don't know what's waiting for you next, but you're ready. You're always ready, because the Arctic has taught you that survival isn't just about making it through, it's about refusing to stop. No matter how many times the world tries to bring you down. In the end, recovery and return to flight aren't just about the physical act of flying again. They're about the mental battle that comes with surviving in such a hostile environment. The Arctic doesn't just test your body, it tests your spirit, your resolve, and your will to keep going no matter what. And when you take off again, you know that you've passed that test, and that you've earned the right to keep fighting, keep flying, and keep surviving. As you soar through the icy skies, you can't help but reflect on how deeply the Arctic missions have changed you. They're not just another chapter in your military career, they're the defining experience of your life, a time that will never leave you. The challenges you've faced, the battles you've fought, and the lessons you've learned in this desolate place have reshaped you in ways that are impossible to articulate. You don't just fly in the Arctic, you become part of it, your soul intertwined with the frozen landscape, marked by the scars of every mission, every crash, and every narrow escape. The most difficult part of the Arctic missions isn't just the physical strain, it's the psychological toll. You've seen comrades come and go, and you've watched the toll that constant danger and isolation take on the human mind. The Arctic doesn't just test your body, it pushes your psyche to its breaking point. The long hours of darkness, the unrelenting cold, and the ever-present threat of mechanical failure all contribute to a constant undercurrent of stress and anxiety. It's a pressure that builds slowly, a weight that you can never quite shake off. You become hyper-aware of every sound, every shift in the wind, every slight malfunction in your plane. You're always listening for the signs of failure, always watching the horizon for the first signs of a storm. It's an exhausting way to live, and it doesn't just end when you leave the Arctic, even after returning to safer, warmer climates. The echoes of the Arctic linger. The mental scars are often harder to heal than the physical ones. The fear, the loneliness, the trauma of survival, it all stays with you, tucked away in the recesses of your mind, waiting for a quiet moment to resurface. It might hit you when you least expect it, a flash of memory, a sudden reminder of the isolation, the feeling of being lost in a world of ice and snow. You've come back from the Arctic, but in some ways, the Arctic never leaves you. The lessons learned, the resilience forged, the relationships formed in the heat of battle, they stay with you, shaping your future decisions, your actions, and even your relationships. But there's another side to the lasting impact of Arctic missions. For all the hardship, the cold, the isolation, there is a deep sense of pride that comes from surviving such an unforgiving environment. You know that you've done something few others could even imagine. You've flown through blizzards, navigated through whiteouts, and survived crashes that would have claimed the lives of lesser men. The Arctic has tested you in every way possible, and you've come out the other side not only alive, but stronger. You've learned to trust your instincts, to rely on your training, and to adapt to an ever-changing environment. You've learned the true meaning of resilience, not just surviving, but thriving in the face of overwhelming odds. The bonds you've formed with your fellow pilots and ground crew become unbreakable. You've shared the same risks, faced the same dangers, and fought for each other's survival. In a place where trust is everything, you learn to rely on each other completely. The camaraderie you share is unlike anything you've ever experienced. You become a family, bound not by blood, but by shared hardship and mutual respect. You know that no matter what happens, you'll have each other's backs. Because the Arctic has shown you just how fragile life is, and how important it is to have people you can depend on. But even as you look back on these experiences with pride, you can't escape the understanding that the Arctic leaves its mark on everyone. The Arctic changes you not just in the way you think, but in the way you feel. You become more cautious, more aware of your surroundings. You don't take things for granted. The simple act of stepping into a plane, taking off into the sky, becomes something sacred. You don't just fly for the mission, you fly for survival, for the unspoken knowledge that each flight could be your last. It's a weight that you carry with you, a quiet understanding that the world you've come to know is fragile, that everything you've built could come crashing down in an instant, and yet you fly anyway. For those who've served in the Arctic, the mission never truly ends. It becomes part of your identity. You carry it with you through every flight, through every decision you make. It shapes the way you approach challenges, the way you see the world, and the way you value life. The Arctic has taught you that nothing is guaranteed, that survival is a fleeting gift, and that every day is a new opportunity to push past your limits. You've faced the worst the world has to offer, and you've emerged stronger for it. And as the years pass, as you look back on the frozen landscape you once called home, you realize that the Arctic has done more than test you. It has transformed you. The cold, the storms, the crashes, they've all become part of you. You're no longer just a pilot. You're a survivor, shaped by the harshest environment known to man. The Arctic has taken something from you, but it has also given you something. In return, the strength to face whatever comes next. And that strength, forged in the heart of the cold, will never fade. As you sit here, looking back on everything you've experienced, you realize that the Arctic was never just about flying, surviving, or completing missions. It was about endurance, the mental and physical strength to face a place that wanted to swallow you whole and keep fighting. It wasn't just about conquering the skies. It was about learning how to live when everything around you seemed intent on breaking you down. The Arctic, with all its beauty and brutality, becomes a crucible, a place that forges you into something different, something stronger, something more resilient. The first time you land after a long mission, your legs feel like they might give way beneath you. The cold doesn't just leave your bones, it sticks with you, lingering long after the flight has ended. You're aware of how much the Arctic has taken from you, how much it's worn you down, but you're also aware of what you've gained: strength, wisdom, a deeper understanding of what it truly means to survive. It's a feeling that stays with you long after you've left the frozen wilderness, a part of you that remains always. But it's not just the physical toll of the Arctic that remains with you, it's the mental scars, the long nights, the crushing isolation, the constant awareness that you could be lost to the snow at any moment. It changes you in ways you can't fully understand until you leave. The friends you've made, the shared experiences of surviving together, become something you carry with you. It's not just camaraderie, it's a bond forged in fire, in the heart of a place where survival was never guaranteed. The people you've met along the way, those who survived alongside you, are etched into your memory. Their faces, their voices, become as much a part of the Arctic as the snow itself. You've shared something with them that no one else can understand. The experience of surviving in the Arctic isn't just something you talk about, it's something you live, something you breathe. When you finally leave the Arctic, when you return to warmer climates, there's a strange sense of emptiness. The cold has been a constant companion for so long that you almost don't know what to do with yourself when the warmth returns. You realize how much the Arctic has shaped you. The quiet, the solitude, the fight for survival, it all feels like a distant memory, yet it remains fresh in your mind, alive and present, as if it's a part of you that you'll never be able to shake. There's a strange beauty in the Arctic, something that's hard to put into words. It's the way the snow seems to stretch on forever, a blank canvas of white, a land untouched by time. It's the silence, the kind of silence that only the Arctic can offer, where the world feels like it's holding its breath. But that beauty is never without its price. The Arctic is a harsh, unforgiving place, and surviving there requires more than just physical strength. It requires mental fortitude, a kind of resilience that can't be taught, only earned through experience. And as you reflect on your time in the Arctic, you realize that you've learned more than just how to survive. You've learned what it means to truly live. You've learned how to push beyond the limits of fear and doubt, to embrace the unknown, and to fight for every moment of life. The Arctic has a way of stripping away the layers of comfort, forcing you to confront who you really are when everything else is gone. It's not just about staying alive, it's about staying elifts, about finding meaning in the struggle, in the fight, and in the quiet moments when you realize you've made it through. The lessons you've learned in the Arctic are the kind that stay with you for the rest of your life. You don't just survive the Arctic, you carry it with you. It shapes the way you see the world, the way you approach challenges, and the way you value every moment of life. You learn to appreciate the small things, the warmth of a meal, the sound of laughter, the feeling of sunlight on your face. These things that once seemed so simple now seem like gifts, precious and fleeting. The Arctic teaches you that nothing is guaranteed, that everything can change in an instant, and that the only thing you can truly rely on is your own strength to endure. And as you finally leave the frozen wastes behind, you know that you are forever changed. The Arctic will never truly leave you. It will stay in your memory, in your thoughts, and in your heart, a reminder of what you've endured and what you've overcome. But there's a strange comfort in that, too. The Arctic doesn't just break you, it rebuilds you, stronger, more resilient, more capable of facing whatever comes next. As you walk away from the base for the last time, the sun rising over the horizon, you can't help but feel a sense of peace. You've made it. You've faced the worst the world has to offer and come out the other side. And with that, you know that there's nothing in the world that can stop you now. In the Arctic, survival is never guaranteed. It doesn't matter how many successful flights you've made or how many challenges you've overcome. One slip, one miscalculation, one moment of overconfidence, and it's all over. It's easy to become complacent when you've faced the brutal conditions of the Arctic and lived to tell the tale. After a few, surviving a crash in the Arctic is only half the battle. The true challenge begins once you've made it back to base, or, in the case of those who survive long enough to return from a crash, once you've fought your way through the brutal cold, starvation, and exhaustion. The Arctic doesn't just punish you once, it continues to test you, to wear you down in ways that are both physical and psychological. You've lost your plane, you've survived the cold, but you now face a different kind of fight, returning to the sky. The moment you make it back to base, you're no longer just a survivor, you're a testament to the resilience of human willpower. The men and women who make it back after a crash don't just return physically wounded, they return mentally scarred, having fought against both the Arctic and themselves. The cold, the isolation, the hunger, all of these things leave marks that don't heal as easily as physical wounds. But still, they climb out of the wreckage, battered and bruised, and they're expected to do it all again. The first thing that hits you after being rescued is the return to normalcy. Such a thing can be called normal in the Arctic. You're back in the base, surrounded by familiar faces, but you're different. You've stared into the face of the Arctic's wrath and come back from the brink, and yet you feel like you've left a piece of yourself behind in the frozen wilderness. But this is what you signed up for, right? To fly, to fight, to survive. The mission isn't over. It's never over. Once you're physically able, the question becomes not whether you can fly again, but whether you want to. You've been through a traumatic experience, one that leaves you scarred both inside and out. Every time you step into the cockpit again, the memory of the crash will be there, lurking in the back of your mind. You'll relive those moments of panic, of helplessness, of trying to control a machine that fought against you. The fear is there, creeping in, but you can't afford to acknowledge it. You've learned how to suppress it, to push past it, because the mission isn't finished. You can't afford to falter. The mechanics at the base work tirelessly to repair your plane, or, more often, to scrounge together enough spare parts to get it flying again. The Arctic's harsh conditions have a way of taking a toll on aircraft. What was once a gleaming machine of war is now battered, bruised, and frozen solid. Every part of it has been pushed to its limits. Every engine, every control system, every instrument has been tested by the brutal cold. But somehow, against all odds, they put it back together. The plane may not look like much, but it's ready for takeoff once more. For you, it's more than just getting back into the sky. It's about proving something to yourself. You're not just returning to duty. You're reclaiming a part of yourself that was lost when you crashed. The fear that holds you back, the trauma that tries to take root in your mind, it's all there, but you push forward. The Arctic has tried to break you, but you refuse to let it. You will climb back into that cockpit. You will fly again, and you will survive. The first flight after a crash is always the hardest. You've been on the ground long enough to feel the weight of your injuries, your fears, and your doubts. The moment you strap yourself in and rev the engines, everything comes flooding back. The shaking hands, the pounding heart, the memories of the crash. But you don't have time to dwell on it. You focus on the instruments in front of you, the rhythm of the engine, the routine of the takeoff. You focus on getting the plane back in the air. As you take off, you're reminded of the true power of flight. The Arctic, with all its dangers, is still a place where planes can conquer the sky. You feel the rush of wind against the fuselage, the steady hum of the engine, the tension in your muscles as you climb. In the air, you're free. The cold, the isolation, the crash, they're all behind you now. You've made it back to where you belong. But even after you take off, the Arctic doesn't let go that easily. The plane is still a fragile machine, subject to the whims of the weather and the harsh elements. Every mission, every flight, is a reminder of how fragile life is in this place. But you've made it this far, and that's something. The fear, the doubts, they never truly go away. But you learn to live with them, to work through them, to continue flying despite the overwhelming odds. As you soar through the Arctic skies, you realize that the true test is not how many times you've flown or how many times you've made it back from a crash. It's about the ability to keep going, to endure, and to keep rising above the storms. You don't know what's waiting for you next, but you're ready. You're always ready, because the Arctic has taught you that survival isn't just about making it through, it's about refusing to stop, no matter how many times the world tries to bring you down. In the end, recovery and return to flight aren't just about the physical act of flying again. They're about the mental battle that comes with surviving in such a hostile environment. The Arctic doesn't just test your body, it tests your spirit, your resolve, and your will to keep going no matter what. And when you take off again, you know that you've passed that test, and that you've earned the right to keep fighting, keep flying, and keep surviving. As you soar through the icy skies, you can't help but reflect on how deeply the Arctic missions have changed you. They're not just another chapter in your military career, they're the defining experience of your life, a time that will never leave you. The challenges you've faced, the battles you've fought, and the lessons you've learned in this desolate place have reshaped you in ways that are impossible to articulate. You don't just fly in the Arctic, you become part of it, your soul intertwined with the frozen landscape, marked by the scars of every mission, every crash, and every narrow escape. The most difficult part of the Arctic missions isn't just the physical strain, it's the psychological toll. You've seen comrades come and go, and you've watched the toll that constant danger and isolation take on the human mind. The Arctic doesn't just test your body, it pushes your psyche to its breaking point. The long hours of darkness, the unrelenting cold, and the ever-present threat of mechanical failure all contribute to a constant undercurrent of stress and anxiety. It's a pressure that builds slowly, a weight that you can never quite shake off. You become hyper-aware of every sound, every shift in the wind, every slight malfunction in your plane. You're always listening for the signs of failure, always watching the horizon for the first signs of a storm. It's an exhausting way to live. And it doesn't just end when you leave the Arctic, even after returning to safer, warmer climates. The echoes of the Arctic linger. The mental scars are often harder to heal than the physical ones. The fear, the loneliness, the trauma of survival, it all stays with you, tucked away in the recesses of your mind, waiting for a quiet moment to resurface. It might hit you when you least expect it, a flash of memory, a sudden reminder of the isolation, the feeling of being lost in a world of ice and snow. You've come back from the Arctic, but in some ways, the Arctic never leaves you. The lessons learned, the resilience forged, the relationships formed in the heat of battle, they stay with you, shaping your future decisions, your actions, and even your relationships. But there's another side to the lasting impact of Arctic missions. For all the hardship, the cold, the isolation, there is a deep sense of pride that comes from surviving such an unforgiving environment. You know that you've done something few others could even imagine. You've flown through blizzards, navigated through whiteouts, and survived crashes that would have claimed the lives of lesser men. The Arctic has tested you in every way possible, and you've come out the other side not only alive, but stronger. You've learned to trust your instincts, to rely on your training, and to adapt to an ever-changing environment. You've learned the true meaning of resilience, not just surviving, but thriving in the face of overwhelming odds. The bonds you've formed with your fellow pilots and ground crew become unbreakable. You've shared the same risks, faced the same dangers, and fought for each other's survival. In a place where trust is everything, you learn to rely on each other completely. The camaraderie you share is unlike anything you've ever experienced. You become a family, bound not by blood, but by shared hardship and mutual respect. You know that no matter what happens, you'll have each other's backs. Because the Arctic has shown you just how fragile life is, and how important it is to have people you can depend on. But even as you look back on these experiences with pride, you can't escape the understanding that the Arctic leaves its mark on everyone. The Arctic changes you not just in the way you think, but in the way you feel. You become more cautious, more aware of your surroundings. You don't take things for granted. The simple act of stepping into a plane, taking off into the sky, becomes something sacred. You don't just fly for the mission, you fly for survival, for the unspoken knowledge that each flight could be your last. It's a weight that you carry with you, a quiet understanding that the world you've come to know is fragile, that everything you've built could come crashing down in an instant. And yet, you fly anyway. For those who've served in the Arctic, the mission never truly ends. It becomes part of your identity. You carry it with you through every flight, through every decision you make. It shapes the way you approach challenges, the way you see the world, and the way you value life. The Arctic has taught you that nothing is guaranteed, that survival is a fleeting gift, and that every day is a new opportunity to push past your limits. You've faced the worst the world has to offer, and you've emerged stronger for it. And as the years pass, as you look back on the frozen landscape you once called home, you realize that the Arctic has done more than test you. It has transformed you. The cold, the storms, the crashes, they've all become part of you. You're no longer just a pilot. You're a survivor, shaped by the harshest environment known to man. The Arctic has taken something from you, but it has also given you something. In return, the strength to face whatever comes next. And that strength, forged in the heart of the cold, will never fade. As you sit here, looking back on everything you've experienced, you realize that the Arctic was never just about flying, surviving, or completing missions. It was about endurance, the mental and physical strength to face a place that wanted to swallow you whole and keep fighting. It wasn't just about conquering the skies. It was about learning how to live when everything around you seemed intent on breaking you down. The Arctic, with all its beauty and brutality, becomes a crucible, a place that forges you into something different, something stronger, something more resilient. The first time you land after a long mission, your legs feel like they might give way beneath you. The cold doesn't just leave your bones, it sticks with you, lingering long after the flight has ended. You're aware of how much the Arctic has taken from you, how much it's worn you down, but you're also aware of what you've gained: strength, wisdom, a deeper understanding of what it truly means to survive. It's a feeling that stays with you long after you've left the frozen wilderness, a part of you that remains always. But it's not just the physical toll of the Arctic that remains with you, it's the mental scars, the long nights, the crushing isolation, the constant awareness that you could be lost to the snow at any moment. It changes you in ways you can't fully understand until you leave. The friends you've made, the shared experiences of surviving together, become something you carry with you. It's not just camaraderie, it's a bond forged in fire, in the heart of a place where survival was never guaranteed. The people you've met along the way, those who survived alongside you, are etched into your memory. Their faces, their voices, become as much a part of the Arctic as the snow itself. You've shared something with them that no one else can understand. The experience of surviving in the Arctic isn't just something you talk about, it's something you live, something you breathe. When you finally leave the Arctic, when you return to warmer climates, there's a strange sense of emptiness. The cold has been a constant companion for so long that you almost don't know what to do with yourself when the warmth returns. You realize how much the Arctic has shaped you. The quiet, the solitude, the fight for survival, it all feels like a distant memory, yet it remains fresh in your mind, alive and present, as if it's a part of you that you'll never be able to shake. There's a strange beauty in the Arctic, something that's hard to put into words. It's the way the snow seems to stretch on forever, a blank canvas of white, a land untouched by time. It's the silence, the kind of silence that only the Arctic can offer, where the world feels like it's holding its breath. But that beauty is never without its price. The Arctic is a harsh, unforgiving place, and surviving there requires more than just physical strength. It requires mental fortitude, a kind of resilience that can't be taught, only earned through experience. And as you reflect on your time in the Arctic, you realize that you've learned more than just how to survive. You've learned what it means to truly live. You've learned how to push beyond the limits of fear and doubt, to embrace the unknown, and to fight for every moment of life. The Arctic has a way of stripping away the layers of comfort, forcing you to confront who you really are when everything else is gone. It's not just about staying alive, it's about staying elifts, about finding meaning in the struggle, in the fight, and in the quiet moments when you realize you've made it through. The lessons you've learned in the Arctic are the kind that stay with you for the rest of your life. You don't just survive the Arctic, you carry it with you. It shapes the way you see the world, the way you approach challenges, and the way you value every moment of life. You learn to appreciate the small things, the warmth of a meal, the sound of laughter, the feeling of sunlight on your face. These things that once seemed so simple now seem like gifts, precious and fleeting. The Arctic teaches you that nothing is guaranteed, that everything can change in an instant, and that the only thing you can truly rely on is your own strength to endure. And as you finally leave the frozen wastes behind, you know that you are forever changed. The Arctic will never truly leave you. It will stay in your memory, in your thoughts, and in your heart, a reminder of what you've endured and what you've overcome. But there's a strange comfort in that, too. The Arctic doesn't just break you, it rebuilds you, stronger, more resilient, more capable of facing whatever comes next. As you walk away from the base for the last time, the sun rising over the horizon, you can't help but feel a sense of peace. You've made it. You've faced the worst the world has to offer and come out the other side. And with that, you know that there's nothing in the world that can stop you now.